Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first this week for our two games is 2017's The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, Nintendo's first modern open-world game that was received as a masterpiece, as it inspired new standards for the genre.
Following that is the follow-up to the massively acclaimed and harshly punishing game about rolling and dying, 2014's Dark Souls 2.
We are in next-gen times, or next-gen has become current-gen times, I guess, as far as the time that we are recording. People watching the video version may notice I have 3 boxes over my shoulder. One of them is not opened. You can guess which one that is. Go check that out. Theme this week for these two games, besides one's combat was kind of inspired by the other, they are both adventures through ruined kingdoms. And on a more gameplay mechanics level, they're both games where your weapons can break. So there's that. Also, they're tied to games that just came out or are coming out this week, as we like to do. But yeah, enough about all of that. Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
I'm doing fine, I suppose. I have been playing a lot of Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory. Like a lot of it. I adore it, except for there's certain parts that irk me. Like, there are 3 types of levels. There's field levels, which is probably what you've seen for the most part. The one where they're just walking and hitting the Heartless down a track. Those are fun. Those are the most common level by like a grand degree, and they're super fun. And then there's boss fights, which are all right. And then there's memory dives, which suck. Like, suck a lot. And they're the least common, luckily. But all of the music from Kingdom Hearts 3, of which there is very little, are memory dives. Almost all of it. Which kind of sucks, and I'm very disappointed about that. Also, no music from Pirates of the Caribbean whatsoever. Nothing. Not even the really good battle theme from 3.
But they should check out your review on Nintendo World Report if they want to get more detailed thoughts.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite video I've made for that channel, and also it just means a lot to me that, like, this series that I really love, I got to review the latest game in it. That's super cool. But yeah, that's pretty much been my whole week.
So my whole week has been 8 hours of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And I was a baby and could not wait for next generation, especially when my PS5 delivery was a little up in the air. So I started it on PS4. And I figured to give myself a good comparison to see what the jump between PS4 and PS5 is like. I basically have completed almost all of the first Norway section of the game. Like, haven't made it to England yet, but going around and doing all the little collectibles and things like that, it's good fun. It's different than Odyssey, certainly, trying to bring back elements of the original, like the Ezio games in a way. For better or for worse. Like some things, don't care for other things, but it's still fun. It was like my most anticipated game of the year, so I'm having a great time with that. And then setting up next gen boxes and all sorts of games to play going forward.
Yeah, I still haven't. I have copies of Yakuza, and I have a copy of Miles Morales, which I actually got a day early on accident. Which that's never happened to me before. That was great. And I have not had time to sit down and play them. Same with The Pathless and Bugsnax, which were the other 2 games that I was looking forward to this week. Hopefully soon.
Yeah, Miles Morales. Got to get to Astro's Playroom, get really the sense of what the DualSense controller is like. Bugsnax for sure. And then I've got a Watch Dogs Legion coming in on a rental for Xbox Series X. So should be exciting to talk about those more in the future. And speaking of next-gen news, let's talk about some composer follow-up headlines. We'd like to talk about the different composers that we've covered on this show. They still make great things. They're still working hard in the industry. And let's start talking about some of the headlines from this past week, being these big next-gen launches. Certain composers we've talked about are assigned to these games that are launching with these new systems. When it comes to Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, that's again John Paisano. Bug Snacks, since it's from Young Horses, Seth Parker continuing over. We talked about him a couple weeks ago for Octodad. And then Astro's Playroom, that's Kenneth Young. Makes sense, Astrobot Rescue Mission, carrying that forward. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a good team of composers led by Jesper Kyd. The Pathless, as we've mentioned, composed by Austin Wintory. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Jack Wall is back on that for the Call of Duty series. And it seems like a team of composers is working on Sackboy: A Big Adventure. But Lena Raine got to announce this week that she composed the world map theme, so good for her.
Yeah. Just a bunch of really good stuff that's gonna make the Best of 2020 episode way harder to put together.
It's going to be difficult. We got a lot of listening to do before the end of the year, which is coming up soon. Oh boy.
Faster than I would like to admit. Meanwhile, 2 games that we have talked about on the show are actually coming to Game Pass soon, being River City Girls and its soundtrack by Megan McDuffie, and Tetris Effect Connected with its soundtrack by Noboru Muto.
I've heard that Tetris Effect really shines on these next generation devices, and I can't wait to see. And maybe, that'll be the push that gets me to try out River City Girls. Very exciting. And we've mentioned it before, but it's important to remember this week is when Katamari Damacy Reroll launches on PS4 and Xbox One. So that should be this Friday, the 20th. If you still have not played that great game, do check it out there.
Yeah, buy it, because I want them to do We Love Katamari next.
All right, let's get into our games with adventures and ruined kingdoms, and let's talk about The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. How has it taken almost 100 episodes for us to talk about one of the best games of the past decade? We have talked about previous Legend of Zelda games before on this show, all the way back with Wind Waker in episode 2, Link's Awakening in episode 34, and we did a Zelda episode where you covered Majora's Mask and I covered Skyward Sword in episode 66. And here we are at 95 with 2017's Breath of the Wild. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild launched March 3rd, 2017 on Nintendo Switch and Wii U. That's right, launch day for Nintendo Switch, arguably one of the best launch titles ever for any system. I mean, right up there with Mario 64 for Nintendo 64. It's an all-timer. And yeah, that's right, it was on Wii U, wasn't it?
I forget that constantly.
So do I. And then when you look up sales numbers, it's like, oh yeah, okay. It was developed by Nintendo EPD with some assistance from Monolith Soft and published by Nintendo. Breath of the Wild is a third-person open-world action-adventure game. You get to run, climb, swim, and glide anywhere in the world, as long as you have enough stamina. You get to procure weapons, food, and other materials from the environment. You do have to note, though, that those weapons will break with repeated use. Once you gain the abilities of creating remote bombs, manipulating metal objects, forming ice blocks on watery surfaces, and temporarily stopping objects in time, the world is yours to fully explore and tackle in whatever order you want. You get to take on 120 shrines to earn items that help improve either your health or stamina. You get to collect over 900 items through little mini puzzles throughout the world that expand your weapon inventory space. And there are just many more elements in an engaging open world to interact with. The plot of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild involves Link awakening with amnesia in a ravaged Hyrule kingdom after being asleep for 100 years in a healing chamber. He hears a voice call to him as Princess Zelda is being held in Hyrule's castle and needs his help. Link then meets an old man who reveals himself as the spirit of King Roam. Roam explains that Ganon, who's also sealed in Hyrule Castle, has grown strong. He pleads for Link to defeat Ganon before he breaks free and destroys the world. So basically the big questions are, what happened to Hyrule? What are the divine beasts and the guardians? And can Link defeat the Calamity Ganon and rescue Zelda to save Hyrule? Joe, here's what I'll ask you. What are our experiences with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild?
I bought it with my Switch. It's basically the only game I had for the Switch for a little bit. And I played the crap out of it. It famously destroyed my playthroughs of, I think, Nier Automata, and 100% destroyed my playthrough of Horizon Zero Dawn. I'm pretty sure it's the exact reason why I haven't beaten either of those games. Nier, maybe not. I don't actually remember if that lined up. But yeah, it's really, really good. I have my problems with it. For instance, you mentioned the weapon breaking. I think that happens way too easily and way too often. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of that mechanic. But for the most part, I've played it. I've played the DLC. I got the motorcycle.
Yeah.
Motorcycle is great. Even though it needs fuel, and that's really dumb in my opinion, but whatever, it's fine. And yeah, it's just a really, really good open world game. And I don't tend to beat open world games because it's overwhelming when you open up a map and it's like, look at all this stuff you can do. And it's like, well, I don't know what the hell to do first then. So I enjoy Breath of the Wild. It's a very, very good game.
See, I love open world games. And so The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild shifting to this kind of format was right up my alley. I also got it at launch for my Switch. Got a nice little special edition that came with the carrying case that I still use today for my Switch and all that. A map, a coin, stuff like that. But yeah, wow, what a game. What an experience. I didn't go full bore in completing it like I know some people did, but I certainly played plenty and enjoyed it. And like you, played the DLC and enjoyed that and got that motorcycle. It's just a masterpiece. And when it's talked about up there, yeah, I agree. There are things that are up to personal taste. Do you like certain aspects of the game? Do you not care for it? But as far as game design goes, it's that Nintendo magic. It's fantastic. And we'll get to talk about the soundtrack, certainly, because some people are also divided in that camp as well. But I feel like it was one that we definitely had to mention here on the show. So when it comes to developing The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, it was Nintendo's first modern open world game that was developed in-house. And the initial work on it started in 2011 after the launch of Skyward Sword on Wii. They looked to, unsurprisingly, the big open world game at the time, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, for influence. And the team wanted to, quote, rethink the conventions of Zelda, a quote that would continue for years and years and keep being referenced and referred to. But the initial thoughts of this kind of way of thinking started with 2013's A Link Between Worlds on 3DS. Before full development on the game, the developers designed a playable 2D prototype that was similar to the original The Legend of Zelda to kind of experiment with physics-based puzzles. And it would be this physics engine that would be critical to the experience because, as the developers described it, it, quote, underpins everything in the world. And it really makes things operate in a, quote, logical and realistic way. And yeah, when it comes to moving things around with magnesis or hitting things in stasis and launching projectiles and even the jumps and the climbing, the physics are just critical in the world. And some people can alter that a little bit and take advantage of certain aspects of the game to maybe create some little shortcuts here and there. But overall, it works amazingly.
Mm-hmm. My favorite thing is speedruns.
Yeah.
in terms of the physics use because of the rocks. Like they'll take a big hammer and they'll freeze a rock in time, and when you freeze something in time, you can like hit that thing and it will like build up quote unquote momentum, even though that's not how momentum works.
Yeah, it just keeps adding to that vector.
Yeah, it'll build up like force, and then after they've built it up to the maximum, they'll just grab the rock and just go flying, and it works.
It's amazing.
Like, Breath of the Wild speedruns are some of the funniest things I've ever, because you don't get any armor, you don't get any weapons, and it's just like, I think I saw somebody describe it as this naked dude is now running through the forest for an hour to beat Ganon with a stick.
And it's designed that way, right? I mean, part of what they were thinking with the challenging of the conventions is that, you can go and explore the whole world and all that, but if you're a more daring sort, you can go right to Hyrule Castle and take on the final boss with your limited equipment. So there is that option. And boy, yes, speedruns of this game are delightfully fun. But of course, because it started development in, early days in 2011, it was originally designed as a Wii U game. However, the devs realized that looking back and forth between the Wii U gamepad and the screen distracted from the game. And then development started for Nintendo Switch. So ultimately, when they pulled it all together and still tried to keep it on Wii U and all that, when the game launched, it was the first main Zelda game to use voice acting in cutscenes, although Link still does remain a silent protagonist. What do you think of the voiceovers? Because I think it was interesting to hear Zelda talk, and at least for those of us in the States, she has an English accent, and not necessarily what I would have pictured, but I think there are some well-matched voices and then some not so much.
I overall think I like the voices. Like, Mipha has a pretty good voice. I love Rivali's voice. It's the exact amount of douche that he should be. Urbosa is, of course, not only the best voice in the game, but the best character in the game. And Zelda, I think, is the one it took me the longest to warm up to, but I think I do like Zelda's voice quite a bit. Daruk is also fun, but Daruk is just like, I mean, yeah, that sounds like what a Goron would sound like.
Big rough guy.
I think it's an interesting thing, and I kind of look forward to them experimenting more with it. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I'd be very excited to see how they toy with that in future games. So this game had certainly a storied development history as far as announcements and teases and delays. So it was originally teased the idea of a Wii U Zelda game at a January 2013 Nintendo Direct. There's the famous teaser video that was shown at E3 2014 where Link was being chased by a guardian and then it revealed his face and he was firing the ancient arrow. That's a well-known video reveal in the Nintendo community, certainly. That showed this game having an intended release date of 2015, though. When early 2015 rolled around, the game got delayed to 2016. And then in early 2016, it got delayed again, but it became the showcase game at E3 2016 in the middle of the year, when we got to see the game for the first time, when the Breath of the Wild name was officially announced, and everyone was like, oh, this is just this little plateau section of the game, and it works. It works really well. Oh boy, I hope that they can continue this throughout the entire game. We got the first story trailer at a Switch presentation, the famous one in January 2017, that revealed that it would be a Nintendo Switch launch game. When the game did come out, it ended up being one of the best reviewed video games of all time, with a Metacritic score of 97. Metacritic actually notes Breath of the Wild as the best game of the decade, and it apparently holds the largest number of perfect reviews of any game from any year. Again, when did this game come out? 2017? One of the best years for video games to be released ever? Okay, let's stick a pin in that. Keep that in mind. Obviously, critics loved it the way it challenged conventions and made you think in new ways, but there were, of course, slight critiques of the difficulty of the game, as you mentioned, the weapon durability, and some people had issues with the level design, particularly in the game's 4 main dungeons. Total sales for the Switch version of the game have reached 19.74 million units by September 2020. It has sold 1.67 million units on Wii U. After the first month, one of the best statistics ever, and especially remarkable going through it at the time. So 1 month of the Switch, it's out, it's in the wild, the Breath of the Wild, all that. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild had an attach rate of over 100% on Switch. What does that mean? It means the game had sold more copies for the Switch version than there had been Switches sold itself, Switch consoles.
That is nuts. That is absolutely nuts.
I mean, for Nintendo games these days, attach rates of 30, 40% are remarkable. And so for such an early time for it to be over 100%, I mean, that's just absolutely, absolutely amazing. And yes, 2017, a great year for video games. Yet, Breath of the Wild was an award show darling. In a year of amazing video games, it was still top of the class. It won Game of the Year at the Game Awards, the DICE Awards, Game Developers' Choice Awards, the South by Southwest Awards. Oddly enough, the BAFTAs picked What Remains of Edith Finch. I mean, great game, not what I would have chosen for those games in 2017. Going forward, though, the game had 2 DLC packs that released in June and December 2017. They were called The Master Trials and The Champion's Ballad. These added different modes, a little bit of some questing to do, and ultimately, as we referred to, gives you a motorcycle at the end of it, and it's so cool.
It's also really dumb.
I mean, yeah, but it's also really cool.
Yeah.
Certainly, plenty of games have been inspired by Breath of the Wild to the point where we still always think I wonder how this game is going to, be inspired by Breath of the Wild or look like Breath of the Wild or Here Come the Clones. And even just this year, we have games like Immortals Phoenix Rising and Genshin Impact, which you look at that and it's yep, I wonder what game you were inspired by. So they're coming. They're out there for sure. This week, on Friday, November 20th, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity launches on Nintendo Switch, and it's another Hyrule Warriors game where it's a Muso, it's a big beat-em-up game, but it plays as if it were a prequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. What happened 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild? What happened during the Calamity? And will it actually be canon? You'll have to find out and play the game this week. Furthermore, at E3 2019, there was an untitled sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild announced with a trailer, and probably Ganondorf is coming back in some way. Crazy, but I can't wait to see all of the different ideas that didn't make the cut in the first Breath of the Wild come out in this still yet unnamed sequel. Of course, one of the better trivia bits I found, and it was just a news story from even just the last couple months, the Irish novelist John Boyne mistakenly included ingredients from a Breath of the Wild food item in his 2020 novel, A Traveler at the Gates of Wisdom.
A historical fiction novel, even.
And it's let's talk about Lizalfo's tales. Okay, all right. So, I don't know. It has its reaches everywhere. It's a very influential video game. And I'm excited to talk about its music. Composed, one of the composers at least, by Yasuaki Iwata. Yasuaki Iwata was born in 1989 in Kobe, Hyogo Prefecture in Japan. He is blood type O. He attended University of Tokyo. And all I can find is that he's been with Nintendo since 2013. It's another one of these Nintendo composers that they generally like to keep pretty private online, at least, as far as what we generally search. Yasuaki Iwata has contributed music to Super Mario 3D World, Mario Kart 8, obviously The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, ARMS, and Animal Crossing New Horizons. He also arranged Battle Island Kahuna from Pokemon Sun and Moon, at least the remix in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. So when it comes to the composition team on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the main composers are Manaka Kataoka, who we've talked about before in our Animal Crossing New Leaf episode, Yasuaki Iwata, and Hajime Wakai, who we talked about on the Skyward Sword episode, I believe. So those three main composers did a bunch of the tracks, but on the official soundtrack release, other composers are credited, including Takuro Yasuda, Ryu Tamura, Soshi Abe, Koji Kondo, Kenta Nagata, Toru Minegishi, Takeshi Hama, and Mahito Yokuta. Quite a few names there that we've talked about before on this show as well. The score is primarily written and performed on a piano, with a big focus on ambient music and sounds, rather than the melodic and upbeat music that has been used in previous Zelda games. According to Hajime Wakai, this helped add, quote, authenticity to the environments, and was taken on as a challenge by the rest of the sound team. So yeah, I think it's important to note that when people say, oh, I don't like Breath of the Wild soundtrack, it's different. I agree, it is different, but it's important not to say it's not worse. I think it fits really well for the big open air environment, relying more on the natural sound of the world to really help immerse you in the experience. And then the music is secondary in this regard. It helps, give color to the experience. For some people, they may miss the traditional Zelda soundtracks where the music is everything and it drives the full experience. But for this kind of game, I think it works really well.
I mean, I agree that it is probably one of the best soundtracks of the year. My only problem really is it getting an award for best score. And then it's all right, cool. You rarely hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, that was weird to me, but it is a very, very good soundtrack. When you do hear music, it's really good. And I do agree that the way that music is used in Breath of the Wild is perfect for what Breath of the Wild is going for. It's just that comes at the cost of you don't hear the music very often.
Yes, definitely. So let's get to the 5 critical tracks on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Have to start with main theme. I feel like if there's one song to know from this game, it is this one, composed by Manaka Kataoka. Yeah, there's a slow build to this big crescendo moment that we highlight here in the clip. An odd little freeze stop point before it too, which I've always found interesting when listening to it. But just a big orchestral swell, the trumpet kind of helping leading that charge, that ramp up, and the flute. Oh man, whatever kind of flute that is, I couldn't really find any specific example of it, but the soaring melody is just one that carries over nicely, even all the way to the final boss fight, the ceremonial part of that final boss fight, if you will. But yeah, a great melody and one that identifies well as Breath of the Wild's main theme.
I think that flute might be a Suwana. But I'm not 100% on that. That is my guess, because it's got that same sort of cadence as a Suwana, which we talked about that instrument back in the detention episode last month. It's a woodwind that mainly comes from China, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, that's what I would guess that is. Yeah, this is the melody that you think about when you think about Breath of the Wild. I like the version that's in Smash a little bit more because I think it's sounding more epic and just driving fits it better. But this slower version is still very good.
Yeah, this one is definitely more for like, look at the huge world that you get to explore. Now enjoy. Go. Like, it's not certainly meant for battle unless it's arranged as such. So the rest of the Critical 5 are pretty key and important melodies that you'll hear across your Breath of the Wild experience. And we continue that with number 2 with Shrine of Trials. Such a great collection of instruments once again in this one. This plays in one of those 120 shrines where you're often using your wits and your tools and abilities to figure out how to get to the end of the shrine and collect that spirit orb. And I think the melody that plays here, the instruments and kind of echoing this melody and then this low bass coming in underneath really emphasizes the idea of thinking and working things out and trying things out and trying to solve those puzzles. I feel like people either get like good flashbacks from this song or like bad PTSD of trying to figure out really tough puzzles. Maybe trying to work with the gyro controls on the Switch and handheld version and just not being able to get it right. I mean, but for all of the shrines that you visit, this is a really important piece in the game.
I always think about the maze with the ball,
Yeah,
where you could just flip it upside down and automatically you win.
an amazing solution that I would think only maybe half people thought of.
Yeah, it's not the first thought you have when you are presented with a ball maze, but you can totally do it, and it works and it counts and it's great. I'll be real, I completely forgot shrines had music until now, and now I do remember this piece quite clearly. Shrines are kind of up and down, in my opinion, in Breath of the Wild, just in general, because, like, they're essentially the replacement for real dungeons. I mean, yeah, you've got the Divine Beasts, but those are kind of just shrines with multiple rooms in them. And so, it's a double-edged sword, and this song mostly has me thinking about that. I do hope that the sequel brings in some more traditional dungeons, but who knows?
Yeah, I would hope so too. But I think it shows perfectly well that, I mean, you may have forgotten about it, but now hearing it, you're brought right back, and it's because it's just the music complements the experience. It's not out in front in your face or in your ears, so to speak, but it's just giving you that ambiance of the environment. Number 3 on the Critical 5. Oh boy, this is Guardian Battle. It's chaos, and what may start as the thought of just run, get out of there, I can't take this on, eventually, if you get skilled enough and your gear is equipped enough, you can take on those guardians, and it's a great feeling. But wow, the low piano, like the bass, just giving you this offsetting, unsettling rhythm, and then the elements that are added, the almost screeching violin coming in, sounds so cool. It may have been taken to almost like meme status in a way, this song, but wow, it's still so good. And it's a different level to the different confrontations that you'll have in this game.
I think this is probably one of my favorite songs of the game. And you're right. Like early in the game, when you hear this song, it's a sign of like, oh, it's time to go the other way now. Goodbye, sir. Sorry to bother you. And then eventually, once you're more equipped, it turns into fight me, coward, robotic coward. And I think that's a really indicative like thing from Breath of the Wild in general, because it's not only like once you get equipped and you get more health and all that, it's also just like, oh, now I know how to fight guardians. A guardian has not killed me probably within the last like 15 hours of my time with Breath of the Wild. A guardian never once killed me. Because especially when you learn how to parry their lasers and just send them back at them. And I think this song really kind of manages to fit both moods of, oh, it's time to run, and time to destroy a robot. It's really fun. I really, really like this song.
Yeah, parrying that laser, there are a few things that feel as good as that in games. That's for sure. Number 4 on the Critical 5. Had to have this one here. This is Hyrule Castle. Look, I know we're at like the apex of the song here in this clip, and it sounds great, but wow, when you're approaching the center of the map here with Hyrule Castle, and it starts to slowly build with this da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, this little melody that comes in, and just over time, as you get closer and closer to the top of the castle, how this song just builds brilliantly. My favorite piece in the whole game. And I feel like it's one of those where this track feels like how Zelda soundtracks used to feel. Like, I feel like you really get the sense of that with the music coming in and not just supplementing the experience, but like, no, front and center, like you're on your path to the final boss. This is where the soundtrack is going to shine right here. Love this. Love how it builds. Mixing in not only the the classic Zelda theme, you get a bit of Ganon's theme creeping in there, and then Monika Kataoka putting her own spin on this melody that the piece starts with overall. Just a fantastic piece, and I think one of the parts of the soundtrack where, yeah, music front and center, it gleams.
Yeah, this is probably a very close second for my favorite song in the game. It also, people like to compare Breath of the Wild and Ghibli stuff, and I think it's a very similar aesthetic, and I think that's a very fitting comparison in terms of like setting and aesthetic and all that. And I think this song sounds the most Ghibli-esque, if that makes sense. Something about the instrumentation just really, really, really fits that vibe.
Yeah, big swelling orchestra for sure. But let's wrap things up in the Critical 5 for Breath of the Wild with Calamity Ganon Battle. I should have mentioned that this track, as well as Shrine of Trials, was composed by Yasuaki Iwata. And wow, yeah, this one is a good one to include. Let's first note that this is the second form of the Calamity Ganon battle. So it's the bigger, bombastic one. You're getting close to taking down the big beast himself. But I feel like this is important to include because this is the main boss battle theme in here. With the bum 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 bum. Like, I mean, you could have put like the Wind Blight, Thunder Blight, Water, Fire Blight, Ganon, battles essentially in there, and it has the same kind of melody, just at a different intensity. But like, this is this theme at its biggest and baddest, and it sounds great. Do I like the ultimate Beast Ganon final ultimate climax part of the battle? I do, because that's like, it's chaos jazz piano under the big swelling Breath of the Wild main theme. But we've already talked about that leitmotif. It was important to include this one because it's the big boss battle theme and important when you're fighting Ganon.
I can't hear this leitmotif without thinking about how much I hate Thunderblight Ganon.
Oh, he's nasty.
That boss fight sucks. That boss fight is the worst boss fight in the game, without a single doubt in my mind. Hot take. Oh, it's so bad. But this song is great. It's absolutely fantastic. And this sort of like climax, the whole climax of that game is really neat, and I really, really love it.
I have a couple tracks on the cutting room floor. Let's start with a theme you're actually going to hear a lot, but it's a little controversial. This is Battlefield. So I feel like this is where people started to form their opinions early on Breath of the Wild's soundtrack, and they got into conflict with some little bokoblins, and this score pops up that it's like these little disparate off-rhythm sounds, and I think you really get used to it, and it works really well for just adding a little bit of chaos into the world with these enemies in what is overall just a beautiful, lush, gorgeous world. But it's a really neat track. I think it highlights this is the big difference between most Zelda soundtracks and this one. It's like the epitome of that difference here. But it's a song that just builds overall as you play the game, as you take on more difficult enemies. The instrumentation grows, the threat grows, so therefore the music that supports the experience has to grow. But yeah, when you're starting off against little babies, it may be a little sparse, and people may have gotten the wrong impression.
So I agree that this is a very good piece, a very neat piece. I hate it, not because it's different, but because I got so absolutely sick of this song by the end of the game, because it's the only enemy battle theme in the game, and you just hear it all the time.
So what you're saying is you would have liked to have it been mixed up a little more, maybe sequel ideas.
Maybe if like each region of the world had its own sort of version or its own theme, like I feel like that would have made it a lot better. But it's just, oh man, by the end of the game, every time this song came up, I was just annoyed because you hear it so many times.
I feel like that would have been interesting for sure. Yeah, have the area of the world kind of influence the instrumentation a little bit. Yeah, that's a really neat idea. Hey, Monica Kataoka, ideas for the sequel. The other one on my cutting room floor, it's a bit of a cop-out, but it's Nintendo Switch Presentation 2017 trailer. look, it's on the official soundtrack as a bonus track, so it counts. I get to include it. The only name attached to it for a credit is that the arrangement was done by Kosuke Yamashita. And wow, I mean, one of the songs that goes with arguably one of the best video game trailers of all time. I don't think it can be stressed that that trailer from the January 2017 Switch presentation, just remarkable. How it starts so slowly, how it adds the story elements, and oh my goodness, the orchestration that just builds and builds. And here in the clip, this is again like the climax of the trailer, the very end. Please listen to the whole piece. Watch the trailer. It's amazing, and it's a piece that really stands out with me. But it can't make the critical 5. It's got to be here on the cutting room floor because it's on the soundtrack. It counts.
Also, the Smash version is so good.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's maybe my new favorite Zelda song in all of Smash. It's so good. Oh my god.
And actually, if I could add one more to this cutting room floor, it would be Cass's theme. Just had to sneak that one in there. Accordion, it's amazing. So what will I never forget about this game? I mean, yeah, it's the most recent mainline Zelda game. It's a series I love. I can't wait for its sequel. I'm pretty excited for Age of Calamity for Hyrule Warriors, but spending a lot of money on games right now, it might have to be a rental. Just saying. But yeah, for the first game on Switch, what a standout. What a masterpiece, and a game that we're still going to feel the effects of for years to come, honestly. Joe, I wanted to ask you, there are 4 main parts of the world, as most people who've played Breath of the Wild know. There's the water section, there's the desert, there's the fire mountain section, and there is the wind section. Do you remember which order you completed those 4 in? Because, yeah, again, players can take on these parts in any order. It's, up to you. I know I went with water, fire, wind, desert.
I believe I went with water, desert, wind, and fire. I think. I didn't know anything about the abilities, and it's a good thing I did water first, because Mipha's Grace. Mipha's Grace is so... It saved me more times than I would care to admit, but...
But also a little scary to encounter Thunderblight Ganon as your second big boss, as opposed to it was the last one for me.
Yep, and that's probably one of the main reasons why I hate that boss. Oh god, it was so bad. And then also, like, Rivali's Gale. If I had to pick an order on a replay, which I will eventually have to replay for Smasterpieces, it'll probably be water, air, fire, and then desert.
Yeah.
Because Urbosa's Fury, as much as I love Urbosa's Fury is, in my opinion, the least useful ability.
All right, so let's transition to our next game. But before we do, we got to cover a fan remix, whether it's on OC Remix, YouTube, wherever. I found a group called Grissini Project. They're a bunch of French musicians, a little quartet, quintet, just a small little ensemble. And they have a Breath of the Wild medley on their YouTube channel. I feel like the part here in the clip is going to be like the final boss, because it's the vocalist with the melody of Breath of the Wild, the main theme, but then some little jazz piano, a little chaos underneath it. I really like it. Hope you do too. We'll be right back.
Let's go a little bit more what would you call it? Like high fantasy almost? No, it wouldn't be high fantasy because there's not like elves and crap. What would Dark Souls be?
Dark fantasy?
Maybe, I don't know. I don't know all of the names for fantasy stuff. Let's talk about Dark Souls 2. It was originally released for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 on March 11th, 2014 in North America. Came out here first. That was surprising to me. Releases would follow in Japan on March 13th and Europe on March 14th. And then it would release on PC on April 24th, 2014. It was developed by From Software and published by Bandai Namco Games. We've sort of talked about a Souls game on this show. It was a long time ago, like, I'm talking episode 8, that game being Bloodborne, which is sort of a Souls game in all but name. It plays a little bit differently, but it shares pretty much all of the same DNA as the series, and also FromSoft made it, so, you know. But as a refresher, because it's been so long since we talked about a game like this, Dark Souls as a franchise is a series of games that have built themselves on providing substantial challenge to the player. It puts them up against relentless areas and powerful bosses, and it's very, very, very punishing, and is just a game meant to make you learn or you do not succeed. The series started with the 2009 PS3 exclusive Demon's Souls, which, hey, just so happens, last week, got a remake by Blue Point Studios. May or may not be why we're talking about this game today. But the series did not reach full critical acclaim until 2011 with the spiritual successor, Dark Souls. So, Souls games are very simple in execution. You play as a human who is cursed to never die. You have 2 slots for equipables, one for a weapon and the other for a shield, though some weapons have the ability of being wielded with both hands, and actually some weapons like straight up require you to wield them with both hands, so it's sort of there's a lot of different weapons and a lot of different builds you can work with in Dark Souls. The player has a very limited range of movement in these games. It consists basically of the ability to attack, sprint, and roll. And that's what you can do in Souls games. Rolling has invincibility frames, but only for a very small amount of time. All 3 of these actions, though, expend your stamina, which is a green bar that, if it is depleted, you won't be able to do anything until it refills over time. In Souls games, the player does not actually have a lot of health, and enemies, for the most part, do a lot of damage. In a Souls game, you can probably take like 3 or 4 hits before you are donezo. But you can heal yourself using an Estus flask. Estus is like this glowing golden liquid that can heal you, but like there's a whole animation of picking up the flask to drink it, and you're vulnerable during that, so that becomes a big part of the game, is strategizing when and how you're gonna heal yourself, which you will have to do quite often. However, the player is only given access to a limited amount of Estus, and this is only refilled by sitting at a bonfire, which serve as the game's checkpoints as well as their fast travel points. If you remember our episode on Bloodborne, it's the equivalent to the lanterns that take you back to the Hunter's Dream. Sitting at a bonfire will not only bring back all of your Estus, but also will respawn every single enemy in the game that you have killed. Not bosses, but like regular enemies. It'll bring them all back. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, if you will. When the player kills an enemy, they will collect souls, which can be used both as currency or used to level up their character. But if you die, you will lose all of the souls in your possession, and then you have to make your way back to the location where you died in order to retrieve them. Dark Souls is well known for having a plot that is mainly told through like weapon descriptions and stuff. It's a very up to interpretation story. But here's what Wikipedia says about a short summary of Dark Souls 2. Quote, "The story of Dark Souls 2 begins with a human who has become undead, cursed to never die, and doomed to eventually become a hollow, a zombie-like being with no memories or purpose. To break the curse, the undead travels to the fallen kingdom of Drangleic, and is tasked by the Emerald Herald with obtaining 4 great souls from powerful old ones whose names are long forgotten and forbidden." So, here's where I will ask, even though I already know the answer to this question, what are our experiences with Dark Souls 2?
Zero experience with Dark Souls 2. I tried Dark Souls Remastered, and apparently was pretty good. So I was told at the boss fights, or at least the first couple, and I'm like, that's just Breath of the Wild and Assassin's Creed gameplay. But honestly, I was really bad with the world exploration, with no map and things like that. So that's kind of what I struggled with, and I dropped it. Joe, what I'm dying to ask you ever since I saw this originally put on our schedule of episodes and planning in the future, why are we talking about Dark Souls 2, the one that apparently fans of the franchise do not like as much? You could have talked about Dark Souls, which everyone loves. Dark Souls 3, even a lot of people like, why are we talking about 2?
Well, funnily enough, I already have an answer ready for this question, because I knew it was coming. And if you didn't ask it, I was going to ask it. Because Dark Souls 2, the reason that I kind of got in to the Souls franchise in general, even though, like, as in as I can be, being somebody that's never finished a Souls game, ever, despite starting like 3 of them, this one included, I got into the Souls franchise by watching an LP of Dark Souls 2, which was specifically on the now defunct Super Best Friends channel, which is, again, the second week in a row where we're talking about a game that they're the ones that got me into. Because Yakuza and Devil May Cry were also in there. They've had some real big influence on some of the games I've gotten into as of late. Huh.
Mm-hmm.
But I watched them do a whole LP where it was Pat and Wooly, and Wooly had never played a Dark Souls game, and Pat knows Dark Souls like the back of his hand. And so what it became was Pat sort of coaching Wooly through this game while also like explaining what certain stuff meant and stuff like that. And it was just so fascinating, and it got me into being interested in this series, despite the fact that I really don't think I have the mechanical skill to beat any of the games. I'm still going to try Bloodborne one day. I'm going to go back and retry it, but I don't think I am fit. I had a very similar experience with Dark Souls, the first one, to you, because the bosses weren't really holding me back. It was, I couldn't figure out where to go.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's basically where it came down to for me too. But yeah, Dark Souls 2 is the reason why I'm interested in the Souls games at all. And so for me, it just felt fitting to be the one that I brought to the show.
Okay. It's a strange choice, though.
It is. It's sort of we'll talk about why, but it's sort of the black sheep of the Souls trilogy. It's the one the least amount of people like. Though, if you want to watch a video that is very good at summing up what Dark Souls 2 does correctly, H-Bomber Guy actually has a very, very good video called In Defense of Dark Souls 2, where he goes into why he loves this game. It's very interesting, I think, but I have also met a good amount of people that don't like Dark Souls 2, so meh. One of the reasons why Dark Souls 2 is kind of the black sheep of the trilogy is specifically because it is one of the only games in the series to not be directed by series creator Hidetaka Miyazaki. And he was a supervisor on this project because I believe at the same time that this game was in development, he was mainly occupied with Bloodborne.
Yep, that would line up.
Again, for this reason, people sort of are iffy on Dark Souls 2. It's a divisive game in the series. So Well, the team at FromSoft had decided that they wanted to make this game take place in a new world, which it technically doesn't. It technically takes place thousands upon thousands of years after the first game. Like, so long that people don't even remember the world, but you can find, like, little bits and pieces of it around as, like, Easter eggs. They didn't want it to take place in the first game's kingdom, which is called Lordran, so instead they created a new kingdom, being Drangleic. But one of the things they were very adamant about not changing was the central mechanics and the controls of the game, because that's what people really, really enjoyed about Dark Souls. They enjoyed, like, the satisfaction of having a game where you honestly play one of the clunkiest playable characters on Earth, and through this adversity, defeat these terrible monsters. And it's really cool, and they didn't want to change anything about that. Though they were asked by the press at some point whether or not they would ever consider an easy mode for the game, director Yuka Kitamura said, quote, "We do not plan on having an easy mode since we are creating this game with a thought that challenge and difficulty are core elements of the game." And usually I'd scoff at that, because I think every game should have an easy mode, or at least the option of one. I kind of get it in regards to Souls, because Souls is one of those games where, like, if the challenge is gone, the game is gone. There's just nothing there anymore. And take that as you will, for better or for worse, but I can at least see where they're coming from. But despite this, though, they did actually take steps to make it a bit more welcoming for beginners at the start. This might help our problem with the original Dark Souls. Specifically, it's not really an open world. Well, it is sort of open, but you've got a hub and you can transport directly to the different areas and explore them that way. So while Drangleic is roughly the same size as Lordran, players have more freedom in choosing where to go, and there's even more content per area than there was in Dark Souls 1. I think a good analog, a modern comparison to make would be why Hades is so successful. Even though that game is built around dying over and over and over again, but you always feel like you are finding and seeing new stuff, even when you're dying over and over. And it seems like that's kind of what they were going for with Dark Souls 2. The game also features various functionality improvements on the original, starting with a new, more powerful graphics engine, as well as new enemy AI that was more sophisticated and would more easily be able to react and adapt to more player actions than before. So Dark Souls 2 was officially announced at the Spike Video Game Awards in December of 2012. Boy howdy, that is a name I've not heard in a long time.
The Keeleys before they were the Keeleys.
Ooh, boy, the Spike Video Game Awards sure were a time. Upon release, the game received near universal critical acclaim. It currently sits at a Metacritic of 91 on all platforms. The mechanics, the sense of challenge, and the world were all very heavily praised. However, like I said, a lot of fans consider it the weakest entry in the trilogy. Criticism was mostly aimed at the more linear layout, in comparison to the first game being a more open world to explore, as well as the complaint that too many bosses are, quote, dudes in armor. So there aren't as many, like, big monsters to fight in Dark Souls 2. It's a lot of like big armored dudes with giant swords and stuff. You know. The PC version did not fare as well in terms of critical reception, because it released with a known bug that tied weapon degradation to the frame rate. And this meant that if you were running the game at a higher frame rate than usual, as PC games tend to do, your weapon would break roughly twice as fast, if not 3 times as fast, especially if you hit a wall, because then it would register hitting that wall or a corpse or something that was not an enemy every frame, and so your weapon would just plummet. It was bad, and they did not patch this until April of 2015.
Yikes.
So Dark Souls PC ports are infamously not good. Pretty much of all of the games in the series, as far as I am aware. The PC port of Dark Souls 1 needs a patch called DS Fix to even make it playable.
Yep, you got it.
So within weeks of release, Dark Souls 2 had shipped over 1 million copies just within North America and Europe alone. And within a year, the game had sold 2.5 million copies worldwide, which is pretty good for a niche game that is extremely hard. Because as much as people might not want to admit it, Dark Souls is a niche franchise. It's less niche than a lot of other niche franchises, but it's still a niche franchise. It won Game of the Year at the 2014 Golden Joysticks Awards and was nominated for Best Game Design Franchise at the Navigator Awards, though as far as I can tell, those are the only 2 awards that it was nominated for, and the Golden Joystick is the only one that it won. A trilogy of DLC called The Lost Crowns was released in 2014, Crown of the Sunken King in July, Crown of the Old Iron King in August, and Crown of the Ivory King in September. A version of the game with various changes, as well as including all 3 DLCs, was released in November under the title Scholar of the First Sin. And another sequel, Dark Souls 3, was released in 2016 and by all accounts, seems as if it will probably be the last game in the series. FromSoft allegedly is currently working on Elden Ring, at least that's what they tell us, but we haven't heard anything about Elden Ring since it was announced over a year ago. So, in terms of the soundtrack, Motoi Sakuraba is the Dark Souls guy, but we've already talked about Motoi Sakuraba way back at episode 20 for his work on Kid Icarus Uprising, so we're going to talk about the other composer on Dark Souls 2 who seemed to be more of a supporting role, Yuka Kitamura. And unfortunately, I could not find a huge amount about her. Maybe one day I'll cover another composer that I can find information on, but today is not that day. At the very least, though, you can follow her on Twitter at _Yuka_Kitamura_.
Oh, badass to go.
Yeah, it's rough. In terms of discography, she was a sound designer on Armored Core 5 and Armored Core Verdict Day. Obviously, she did Dark Souls 2. She was a sound designer on Bloodborne. She did music for Deracine, which is a PSVR game from FromSoft that I had not heard of prior to this.
I have. I think it was a launch game, but I think that's just overall your lack of familiarity with PSVR and its library.
Yeah, that would probably do it. I was not familiar with it. She was one of the composers on Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and she confirmed on Twitter that she is on the composing team for Elden Ring, if that game does in fact exist. Don't really have any historical development research, couldn't really find anything about Dark Souls 2 specifically, so I guess we're just going to jump into the 5 critical tracks. I think this game has a pretty good soundtrack, I won't lie. I think it's interesting, and my favorite track on the whole soundtrack is actually critical track number 1, Majula. This song, as well as all but one of the songs on the Critical 5, was composed by Motoi Sakuraba. Majula is the game's main hub. It's where the Emerald Herald is. It's just a small little village that is really jaded and sad and run down, like everything in Dark Souls. And I really, really like this piece because it's really low-key and honestly really relaxing, but it just has this melancholy feeling to it. And there's a bit of a feeling of safety in there too, but the melancholy really like builds everything up, and just sort of the bells really, really make this song just give it this haunting flair in a way. It feels like a song that brings about the mood of a place you can rest, but the song is also trying to remind you that eventually you are going to have to journey back out into the horrors of this world. I think about this song when I think about Dark Souls 2 because it was used in the opening to that LP, but also just, it's a really, really good piece. It's pretty, and I like it.
Yeah, if it's for the hub area, you kind of have to include it. It's a pretty important part you go back to. I was not expecting a sound like this, but I do like the interplay between the nice calmness of it and then like the undertone of there's still danger in the world.
Mm-hmm. It's very impactful, I think, personally. Meanwhile, critical track number 2 was actually composed by Yuka Kitamura. Hey, it's the only one on the list that was. I'm sorry, Miss Kitamura. Please forgive me. Critical track number 2 is The Pursuer. The Pursuer is the second boss in Dark Souls 2, and he is, surprise, surprise, a big floating armored man with a big sword. That's all he is. Big sword and a big shield. I really like this song because it has like really cool, deep bass vocals, and they're really neat, and they really bring about this threatening aura to The Pursuer. And honestly, I can't think of another game that has this sound specifically, and I just really dig what this song does. It's just really heavy. It's relentless. You might even say it's pursuing you.
Yeah, it's got a real cool pace to it. I feel like this is what I think of in general, at least this mood of music when I think of Dark Souls music. And yeah, it's got that boss vibe for sure. I mean, just, yeah, good pacing and rhythm, and oh man, yeah, the deep vocals really sells it.
Yeah, I really, really dig those vocals. They're super, super cool. So yeah, that's why this song stood out to me a lot. I will remind folks, I haven't played Dark Souls 2, and I watched this LP 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So I don't fully remember a lot about these bosses, but I remember enough. Speaking of a boss I didn't really remember until I went and watched him be fought, or watched her be fought? I guess it's a her. Critical track number 3 is The Duke's Dear Freya. Hey, I really hope you're not afraid of spiders, because this boss is a giant spider, like a giant spider that sends smaller giant spiders after you en masse. I like this song because at certain points it has like very similar vocals to The Pursuer, but like a higher register. Obviously, it's not the oh, it's more.
There you go.
Yeah, you get it.
Good.
I shouldn't be allowed to do this show. Also, I really, really like the violin stings in this song, and the little slides and tremolos that always seem to appear whenever it's a song about bugs.
Right?
Like Resident Evil 7 has it too.
We were just talking about it a couple weeks ago, where it's that violin part with the
Yeah, that just appears to always be the little motif that bug-based songs tend to do, but I think it's used to really good effect in this song, and I really, really dig this piece.
Oh yeah, no, I could totally get that sense of creepy, crawly bug things, and yeah, spiders. If there's one thing, what does this go with? A spider, for sure.
Spiders, always spiders. It's always got to be spiders, man. Critical track number 4 is actually for an optional boss, which is a little bit weird. It is the Ancient Dragon. So at some point in the game, you will wander into the presence of a very, very, very old dragon. Like, ancient, you might say. And he will speak to you telepathically, and then he will give you a key item. And then if you run up to him and attack him multiple times, then he will get up and will activate a very lengthy and difficult boss fight. It's something that you can do with... They're not bosses, but pretty much every NPC you can kill in a Souls game. You can run up to the Emerald Herald and just smash her down. I don't recommend it. She's the one that levels you up. But you could, if you wanted. I really like this song because the first words that came to my mind when I looked up the details of this boss were regret and timelessness. And if that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry. It doesn't make sense to me either, but we're going to get through this together. It's just got this really grand sense of scale, and it feels like you're fighting something whose age is just beyond your comprehension. This thing is older than you could possibly imagine, and it also sort of has this vibe of hey man, you probably shouldn't have picked this fight. You could have just walked away.
Yeah, I was thinking immediately, big mistake. I mean, how the clip starts, that's how the piece starts. When you decide to attack that dragon and it's just big evil chords. Yeah, you brought that upon yourself.
Yeah, you really shouldn't have, probably shouldn't have attacked this thing. Have fun dying. And I believe, I don't know if the Ancient Dragon works like this, but pretty much every NPC, if you don't kill them, but you attack them enough to draw aggro, they never un-aggro. Ever. So if they ever are near you, they will try to kill you. So I don't know if the Ancient Dragon works like that, but I'd like to believe it does. Our final track on the Critical track number 5, is Nashandra. Nashandra was the queen of Drangleic. She is a mad, evil, twisted creature that was pretty much directly responsible for the kingdom's destruction. She basically told the king, hey man, we should go, mess up those giants across the ocean. And the king was like, you're hot, I'm gonna do that. And then they did that, and they came back, and was like, it's really peaceful. And then the giants showed up and destroyed Drangleic. Because you messed with giants. Within this game, she has been pulling your strings throughout the game in a human form, but then she comes out for her boss fight in this Grim Reaper style design of slime, and she's made of skeletons, and it's really cool design. And I really like this song because it just kind of feels different from the other songs that we've talked about for this game. it has like this air of madness and malevolence to it. And I believe that is sort of fitting that it also sounds kind of epic because, like, I think Nishandra is one of the final bosses of the game, but I couldn't tell for sure. I'm pretty sure she is, though. A very, very cool song with just a really cool vibe that just feels different. I think this is a very close second for my favorite song in the game.
Yeah, this is a really neat one. It's really those high-pitched female vocals that, yeah, when you're talking about an air of madness, and it's a mad queen, yeah, that fits, that tracks. Most of these Dark Souls pieces like have that kind of orchestral feel to it, and it's really all about what supports it underneath that gives it the character and like the gothic feel.
Mm-hmm. So, for tracks on the cutting room floor, I got 2. The first one is Longing. Boy, bet you didn't think you'd hear this song when talking about Dark Souls.
Oh.
This is the credits theme of Dark Souls 2. It is a song that just sounds hopeful? What? Hope does not belong in Dark Souls? That's an oxymoron. I mean, there's also like a mournful vibe to it, but for the most part, I think that female vocalist like really, really rocks a sort of hopeful vibe. Like there is hope for the future, even though everything sucks right now.
You definitely do have the lower chords cutting in at the end of the clip, especially, and it's just like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, though. Let's be real. Like, remember what this world actually is.
Yeah, everything still sucks. It's just the song has an air of like, maybe it won't always suck. The other song on the cutting room floor is Ava, the King's Pet. Ava is a giant tiger that you fight in one of the DLCs. I don't really have a lot to say about this song. I just like it. It's got a really neat violin part, and it's just really cool, and I dig it.
Yeah, definitely notable that it's not on the original game soundtrack, but it's on the OST for Scholar of the First Sin. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what will I never forget about Dark Souls 2? Again, watching an LP of this game got me interested in the Souls franchise way more than I thought I would ever be, because up to this point, my feelings on the Souls franchise was like, those games are aggressively not for me. And part of me still kind of feels like that, but it at least got me to try them out. And I do enjoy Souls games, and I wouldn't have even given them the time of day if not for that Let's Play. So I feel like I owe Dark Souls 2 specifically some form of reverence in that way.
A peculiar choice for Dark Souls nonetheless, but when it comes to talking about games with this kind of style of combat to it, with adventures in ruined worlds, with games that have breaking weapons, arguably much faster than you'd want it to, when it comes to Breath of the Wild and Dark Souls 2, that's a pretty good episode of original Soundchat here. So that'll do it for us this week. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at Thedobaga. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, also at rhymeswithasia.com. But it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Masterpieces, is hosted. And you can find those podcasts on services around the globe, wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, where we have not only the podcast feed on Spotify, but we also have a Spotify playlist for original Soundchat. If we talk about a video game song on this show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to that big old playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Well, Dark Souls 2 is on Spotify, but as I'm sure you've already guessed, Breath of the Wild is not.
It's Nintendo. Come on, Nintendo. And then when you're done listening there, you can find us on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave feedback for us, give us suggestions on games you'd like us to cover in the future, and keep posted there for updates on bonus tracks, where we're still working on Best of 2017. Joe, next week, it's Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and we want the week off, so we're doing a Q&A episode like we did last year.
Yeah, should be fun. Hope you enjoy that, and we'll be back to our regular game soundtrack shenanigans the week after. All right, Joe, let's play us out.
So I did eventually, while looking surprisingly difficult to find something for this game, but I did eventually find a cover of Majula. It is called Like a Dream. It is by Alex Rowe, and it's just good. It's just good.
Thank you so much for listening this week to Original Sound Chat. We'll see you next time. Take care.